Hello, so this is J Cox, and welcome to our event, Crisis Strategy, Successfully Pivoting Your Personal Strategy in Times of Change. I'm one of your co-hosts, J Cox. I'm along with Mark Pfister, who's on the other line, and so welcome. So as you can see here in our, we have a few goals that we're going to go through, and this is one of my favorite quotes I like to help share with is, hope for the future is power for the present by Zig Ziglar. And that's what we're going to talk to you a lot about today is that it's when you do have a plan and when you do have thoughts around going forward, you can have some incredible time to be able to help get through to there. And with that, some of the introductions, I'll go through that in a moment. We're going to talk about strategic significance, and Mark's going to help lead that with his expertise that he has in strategy. We're going to talk about why a personal strategy is important. You know, there's so much to all to talk about is what's the corporate strategy. But we're going to talk about today personal strategy and how you can consider mapping that, changing that, then how to map it, and then going to actual execution with a call to action. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of myself, and then I'm going to have Mark go ahead and share. I'm going to talk about Mark, and then we're going to get forward with the progress here in just a moment. So once again, my name is J Cox. I'm the CEO for 40 Strategy. Why we're called 40 Strategy is about 2% of people's time is spent on strategic planning. And that ends up about 40 hours per year. And so I actually not only help out with the strategic ideation, but the execution for organizations of all different sizes from startup to Fortune 50. And along with that, prior to this, I was starting up 40 Strategy. I was with a strategic planning software company based out of Australia, and I helped open up the US office. In about 3.5 year period of time, we went from 50 clients to 350 clients and had incredible array of helping out all these different clients in different industries, but also seeing best practices that worked and didn't work. And I'm primarily lived in the Northwest most of my life, and I have my family here just west of Portland. However, I'm originally from Boston, and I went to school at the University of Washington. So next person I'm going to share is about Mark. Mark is the CEO of Pfister Strategy Group, an executive management and board consulting firm, and he serves as a strategy advisor council for executives and boards in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. When normal times, he's able to travel to actually 80 events on a yearly basis on his international speaking tours on the topics of strategy, building an effective board for your company, and becoming exceptional board director candidate. What's impressive is he has a newsletter which has over 26,000 business leaders in over 70 countries. And he has a book called Across the Board, The Modern Architecture Behind an Effective Board of Directors. And it was #1 in its first week of launch and is now also in over 70 countries. So let's go ahead and we'll pop over to the next slide and we'll start moving forward with our webinar part. So one of the key ways we're going to talk through is our interactive via chat. So you are on mute mode during this time, but our way to be able to communicate you is chat. And I appreciate the thank yous and comments that people had in the chat section. So first one I want to do just to get an idea of where everybody's from is please go ahead and type in the chat where you're calling in from today. All right, so we have Los Angeles, New York City, Seattle, Dallas, Providence, Bronx, the New York City area, here a few here in Portland, Austin, Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for making that. What time? Okay, so what time of day is it in Johannesburg, South Africa? As you can visit Angelica. We have from Scotland. So really great. Hi Ross. Glad you made it. 7 p.m. in South Africa. All right, thank you. I used to work with Australians quite a bit, and in England, I worked with several people, but I had not worked too much in South Africa. So thank you for that. So, and now second thing I want to ask is why did you sign up today? And so if you could just give just a quick little message, why did you come on board and why did you share your time with us today? And just enter that in the chat. Any quick comments you have, why you ended up? Cool, interesting topic. Like the previous sessions. Changes worlds led me to change my life. I hear you, but it's been a common thing. Always fascinated by personal growth strategies, learning and idea strategies, better communicate with employees, Uh, hey, Mark, heard Mark before and impressed. Um, like to hear a personal strategy. Haven't heard with Mark and Linda. Good time for subject matter. I want to understand your view differences between personal and business strategy. That's a good question, Ross. And determine who thought leaders are in the pivot from pause. Not something we spend enough time on. Decided to be more thoughtful about my brand. That's a really good insight there as well. So that's great. Thank you for everyone's thoughts and questions. It's awesome to get so many people from around the world. That is one of the beautiful things of the technology and that we've been paused here for a moment by what's been taking place. So this is once again being recorded for future use. Everyone who's properly registered will be able to provide and forward this information to you. So with that, Mark, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Great. Well, Carl, it's always a pleasure working with you. I know we've collaborated on a few different things over the years. Even last year, I think it was around, as we mentioned, around this time. So always a pleasure talking strategy with you. I don't think either of us ever get tired of it, just based on its usefulness. So I think for today, one of the most important things to understand in this is that most of the time when you hear of the word strategy or the definition of strategy, which we'll talk about in a moment, typically it's applied to corporate strategy. And I think one of the big misses in this is that it's not being leveraged as much as it should be or as well as it should be for having your own personal strategy. And we'll talk a little bit today about how you can apply those things, and even in today's world, how we can pivot and be flexible in how we pivot on our current strategies to make sure we're achieving what we want to achieve in our own personal lives. And of course, comparing that to our professional lives, and hopefully those two lines intersect as closely as possible to make sure that your strategies are aligned, which typically leads to a feeling of contentness in what you're doing, both in your personal and your professional life. So I'm always a fan of first talking about the history of strategy. Where did we come from? What is this whole background of strategy, and where has it been applied? And I'll do the shorter version of this for our introduction today, but just know there are tons of details on this. If you want to speak more about this, always reach out to me, or you can do your own research on this. But as a starting point, let me first say that there have truly only been 3 professions in the history of our world where these professions have truly utilized or honed or evolved strategy. And that's between war, politics, and business. And before the comments come in that I said that war was an area of work or it's a focus area, know that warmongering, as it was called many years ago, that truly was an area and one of the earliest areas that strategy was honed and utilized. And if we look at the different periods of strategy, we see there's mainly been 6 and 5 that have been defined to date. We see 500 BC through 1900. So believe it or not, that period of time between 500 BC and 1900 has been grouped together in really 3 areas of war strategies and conflict deterrence. And one of the most famous areas to read more about this area of war strategies and conflict deterrence was Sun Tzu in China in 500 BC. His book, The Art of War, is actually still relevant to this day. It's still utilized by nation states to this day. And it's about not just winning the battle, but it's winning the battle without fighting, which is, in his philosophy, it's the best way to win. So it's quite an interesting way of application of strategy for war, but actually avoiding the war was the strategy to begin with, and still come away as the victor. Throughout that time of war strategy being honed, you start to see this introduction into politics and exclusivity. And let me give you 2 examples of this that I think are great names to throw against this. So if we look at Niccolo Machiavelli, he wrote a book and really is known still to this day as the father of modern political theory or father of modern political science. His book came out in 1532, and many people don't realize that actually that was published 5 years after his death. So he had wrote it in 1527, and it was published 5 years later. And his book basically, and I will say still to this day, it is read in political science coursework. His book, The Prince, published again in 1532, it is still the go-to handbook as part of studies for political science. And I like to say it's also the handbook for politicians to this day. And I still laugh because if someone says that you are Machiavellian, it refers to your acts of deceitfulness or manipulation. So it's not by chance that many times you hear in politics, or the strategy of politics is this approach of deceit and manipulation. So that's where we talk about the politics or the political use of strategy. And that moves us down there into the realm of the exclusivity, which is when you start to see this more and more tied into the business or the corporate realm. And the name that always comes to mind when we think of exclusivity is John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil Company. His strategy and philosophy was, if I control everything, there is no competition. And we think of the correlated word or the parallel word to that as monopoly. And that's truly what it was. And it worked quite well. In today's, corrected for inflation, in today's money, John D. Rockefeller would be worth $340 billion, which kind of even puts some of the numbers you hear today of some personal wealth when we talk about Jeff Bezos and others at $130 billion. It's still not even to the halfway mark of the $340 billion mark that John D. Rockefeller would be touting today if he was indeed still around. So 3 of those examples there where a specific individual fit into using a strategy. So strategy still to this point, as we move into industrial proficiency, is still mainly used in, I'll say, in the areas of profession. But you will see that certain individuals have adopted these strategies and use them as their own personal strategies, which is kind of the topic of what we're talking about today. The industrial proficiency phase from 1900 to 1968 is what we view as truly the 3rd phase of strategy. And this is summarized quite well by Michael Drucker, the father of modern management. And he talks about this as a period of time that is solely a competition on price. And not that he was an advocate for this, but he was summarizing this time period of industrial proficiency and talking about the fact that, yes, it was a great way to get your business known and get your products and your services sold, but ultimately it is a race to the bottom. If it's only about cost and your strategy is only about lowering cost and lowering your sale price, you're basically running your whole industry into the ground, because it's always going to get cheaper. You're always going to try to make it cheaper. Your profit margins are shrinking. So it truly was a very myopic strategy or approach in terms of how the industrial proficiency strategy phase worked. From there, we move into what's called the strategy heydays. This is 1969 through the 1990s. And this is summarized very well by Michael Porter in his book, What is Strategy? He talks about now throwing another component in. So it's the industrial proficiency viewpoint of lowering cost, but also adding into this another facet, which is do something no one else can do. So you can get this hold on your marketplace, and you basically own this approach, or you own the patent, you own the trademark. Combine that with the cost component, and you have another facet of how to be strategically competitive in this time period. That led us further into what's called a strategic proliferation. What added to this really are 3 components. So it's build on what you already do, which was included in the strategy heydays. Do something new, which is number 2. And number 3, react opportunistically to emerging possibilities. And you can think of things such as technology proliferation and the internet proliferation that helped us with actually getting these new ideas and new concepts into our strategy to expand our focus areas for what these products and services could do. But inherently, when we talk about proliferation, usually there's a downside to that word as well. And the number and thousands of strategies were created. They were propagated on the internet, and it truly left a large amount of global organizations in this paralysis state. They were applying the wrong type of strategic components or strategic principles into projects where they had no possibility of being successful in how they were trying to be implemented. So it led to this huge paralysis. There was a study that was done many years ago on the billions of dollars globally that was wasted simply by not implementing the proper strategy or correlating the right strategy to what was looking to be done. Michael Rayner wrote a great book on this at the time. It was called The Strategy Paradox. It's a talk, he talks about the collision between commitment and uncertainty. And truly, if you boil all this down, it's how do you make choices based on assumptions about a future that cannot be predicted? So it's this paradox of, I need to be a leader, or have my strategy that where I'm going to set my goals and work down my path and have direction. But I also have to take some of this uncertainty about the future into this. And that's going to fit somewhat into what we talk about today on pivoting. If you do have your strategy and your goals set, how do you make sure you're comfortable with pivoting in that realm? And one last piece for the audience to talk about here is that from the 2010s onward, we actually do not at this point have a globally agreed name for this period of strategy, which is quite interesting because it's changing so quickly. I've started to talk about this as what I've nicknamed the amorphic strategy phase. And I think about this plastic bag that's filled with water and you're trying to hold it up at all times and the water's moving inside and there's new things that are happening. So you're constantly working with this amorphic mass of change. And what's interesting about this is that we're looking at so many inputs into this, from data to new technology, disruptive markets, market trending. And of course, this AI and machine learning is going to totally change how we go about our focus areas in the implementation of strategy. So it's all about taking this into consideration, both in the amorphic strategy phase, looking at this on a much bigger scale of both your personal strategy and trying as closely as possible to align that in your search in the corporate strategy or the corporate world. And there are alignments we can do. Now, that's not to say that you want to say, change your strategy to match the corporate world or change the corporate strategy to match yours. It's how do you get those as closely matched as possible to make sure that you're fulfilled in what you're doing. All of this.
Oh, Mark, if I could interrupt you here real quick, sure. And for two reasons. One is I do want to encourage, if you have questions about this topic, you go ahead and pop in the Q&A or in chat. We're watching both of this as we go through here. But I did have a quick question. One of the terms I've used is using the term of being agnostic about strategy terminology. And so that's often what I do, because I'll adjust, or I'll be, if you may, amorphic, right, towards how people use terminology. But what do you think is critical when you are using different type of terminology that you're actually saying the same thing? What's important about that?
I think that it has to be agreed upon, and we see this often. I'm sure you see this, Carl, in your strategy work as well, in your consulting world. But the same word can mean multiple things to multiple people. So I truly think it's about defining what that terminology is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today when we talk about and work through even an example of setting your own personal strategy and the ability to pivot that strategy. But it's really about understanding and conveying and communicating what exactly you view that strategy is. Strategy is composed of, and also how you plan on communicating that out to a larger environment. I always say strategies that sit in the back room for everybody to plan, they go nowhere because no one else has bought into it, no one else is communicating or talking about it. So it's making something as simple as possible to allow others to not only get engaged with it, but be bought into it. And it's probably a perfect segue, Carl, into just one other piece on the history or the morphing of strategy right now, is that the old definition of strategy, or what I view as the old definition of strategy, was this careful plan or method over a period of time to achieve a specific goal. And I will tell you that I am no longer bought into that. I actually think that we're not looking at these hard, tangible things such as a careful plan or method. I don't think we're always looking over what's considered to be either a short or medium term time period. And you'll see here that the true definition, or the previous definition, stated specific goal, singular. I wish I had a position in which I could focus on one goal, because I probably have it done within 2 weeks and I could move on to my next singular goal. Typically, there are multiple goals. And as we move away from this tangible plan and these pieces, strategy today, with all the inputs that we have to deal with in this amorphic world, or this amorphic strategy concept, is that we're truly looking at strategy being a set of guiding principles that generate a desired pattern of integrated decision making. And of course, all of this in support of the goals. This integrated decision making is what allows for this diversity of thought. It allows for the pivoting that we want to do. It's no longer set your goals and your strategy for 5 years and let's stay on that path. It just doesn't work that way anymore. So remember that we're looking at a new definition of how strategy is defined: guiding principles, a pattern of integrated decision making, and of course, always comparing this back to making sure it's in support of the goals. All right, Carl, are you on mute right now? You may be on mute.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's a, by the
Okay.
way, that's a little pro tip, by the way, is put yourself on mute and you find you'll end up getting some great questions from other people before you're ready to butt in again. So, all right. So Mark, that's great. Thank you so much for this great presentation. We'll get to hear the whole part back here last April in Portland. If we go ahead and pop over to the next slide, and so one of the things when we talk about, focusing on your goals is fear is huge with this. And one of the ways I talk about, if there's any one common thing that's happening right now, is fear. Fear, fear, fear. Everyone is afraid to go outside. They're afraid to shake hands. They're afraid to meet with people. They're afraid to get within 6 feet. I literally was walking down the street the other day, and people had walked not 6 feet away from me. It was like 20 feet away. They had literally walked and completely detoured away and waited for me to pass and then came back. So fear is an absolute thing. And not only is this a corporate problem, but it's a personal problem. It's much more of a personal problem right now. And so one of the ways to get through this is to really focus and think. But when you're coming up with your personal strategy, is you really have to think ahead. You have to think ahead about what your vision is about. Where do you envision yourself being? A vision is about picturing yourself where you want to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And you see this background, there's a beach, and perhaps 10 years from now, you want to have, do the result of the great work that you've done and how you pivoted your career. You want to have an ocean beach view that's looking at something like this. And so that's the first critical part. What we talk about at 40 Strategy is we want to make sure that people are doing the strategy with purpose, not just randomly, but they actually have a real goal around that. And so that hits us to the goals element. Once you've actually established your vision, you have to start establishing goals. Right now, actually, we're telling people, because so many people can't think long term, because they don't know what's going to happen next. There isn't this certainty. And so I'm trying to get people just moving again. And so we're setting a lot of short goals, 10, 12-week goals. Maybe we'll call it 90-day goals, but I like actually to do weekly segments around it. And secondly, we talk about setting those 2 and 5 year goals as well, because we ultimately want to have this higher picture and we want to push ourselves to meet more things. But right now, get some early success and start moving forward. And that's the goal element behind things. And then the bottom there, as we move in the cycle, is launching. It's amazing how many things don't actually move forward, even after designing a goal. As a matter of fact, in one of the studies that we do, only 20% of strategic projects start on time. This is fascinating to me. It's fascinating that here we spend all this time figuring out what we want to do, and we don't actually even start the project. You never succeed. If you're a golfer, there's a comment, you're familiar with the terminology of hitting an eagle putt. This would mean getting 2 below par. And there's a comment that says nobody's hit an eagle who's hit it short, meaning the short of the hole. You have to try, you have to swing, and you have to start moving forward. And then the next part of this is measuring. If we're setting goals that are not measurable, if we're driving a vision that you can't fulfill, it's not a good goal. And often people won't launch because they know it can't be measured. It can't be find success. And so with this, I'm a really big fan of not only measuring, are we getting to the outcome, but are we actually measuring towards the leading indicators of starting to drive towards a particular level of success. And through those different areas. And then once you measure, you continue to drive toward your vision. And this is a continued cycle of helping to improve who you are and what your personal strategy is. Looks like we have a little question there. I'll leave this open here. So how does one work for a publicly traded company that has its own culture and disparate strategies navigate in the world today? The company's manufacturer provides product and service in the building efficiency market. So I wouldn't mind tackling this, but Mark, do you want to tackle this particular question?
I could start if you'd like, and then you can add to that with some of your experiences. But for a lot of the strategy workshops that I do with organizations, this is typically one of the biggest challenges that they bring up across their environment. And in many cases, I like to see this start, and we're going to speak in a moment about this, which may be helpful. We're going to talk similar to what you mentioned here, Carl, on setting the goals first, and how an organization can actually leave some of the launch aspects, or I'll say the focus areas of how this, the strategy is typically the how, or how you're going to get something done. I'm a believer in proper leadership of the how is left to management, and the goal setting is left to either the board or the C-level. Now, when I say that, it's not just to say that that's set in stone. Those things should be challenged as well. But when you're talking about larger multinational organizations, I typically focus more so and first and foremost on the process of how the strategy and the goal setting is done, to allow for the voices across the organization to chime in and give their input on what they feel those things should be. There's something about inclusion, and by the way, inclusion or allowing for inclusion in your strategy build is a strategy within itself. So, you know, organizations that talk about how they're going to go about building their strategy for the components and the input they need, that to me should be actually, you know, one of the earliest components of a successful strategy is how are you communicating and allowing for that two-way street to participate in those things. Ultimately, they have to be bought into it to do the job that you're looking for them to do, and to be happy about it and bought in and have ownership in it. So all those pieces should be built into the strategy to do this correctly.
Yeah, and I appreciate those insights, Mark. And one of the things that I think if you have is set up a really strong culture, you're going to attract the people you want to have, and not everybody's going to fit into that. And so that creates a real quandary, right, for somebody who they might actually are happy with getting paid, and especially now having a secure job. But for the long term, it doesn't work because you aren't aligned with them at its core. Mm-hmm. And I actually think people have, talking about personal strategy, people have to really figure out who they are, figure out who they work with, and they have to make, at the right time, make that bold decision of being true to themselves. And ultimately through that jump and through that transition, they're going to be happier people. They're going to feel like they're walking on the beach every single day, not just 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
And so, but that's a tough one, right? Because once again, I don't want to leave a job. I'm fearful. I've got a thing. I've got a mortgage I have to pay, and people don't want to make those changes. But I do think in your personal strategy, you either have to once again be a part of the solution, or you have to ultimately walk away so you can be a solution for somebody else.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that the cultural component, which by the way, you could actually say that the cultural component of the organization as part of its strategy on keeping a highly interactive and positive culture, that all comes back to, I'll say, leadership again, whether it's the board or the C-level, in looking at the values of the organization and how those values are being lived. Values to me actually are the predecessor to the cultural, how that organization is living their values, which becomes the culture of the organization.
Perfect. So go ahead, let's go ahead and pop on to the next part here, Mark, that you have.
You got it. All right. So just to expand a little bit, Carl, on your great intro to this, you know, there's a chart, a very simple chart that I've been honing over the last 10 years. And in a lot of the strategy work, Carl, I'm sure you see this as well, is that sometimes you do have to take that step back and say, you know, what, if the word strategy is so overused today, everything has a strategy behind it, right? And if you truly drill down into what somebody believes is a strategy, most times you're going to hear tasks that come back from that. And meanwhile, if I look at this in the most simple diagram possible, this is something that I reference still to this day. I hone this once in a while with certain words I'll tweak or add to it or remove. But at its core, think about strategy fitting into just three steps of a visual look at this. So on one side, you have goals. On another side, you have tasks. And in between that sits strategy. And it's not by chance that's a double pointing arrow in this space, or a double-edged arrow, because the strategy truly is the how you're going to get these things done. And one of the biggest mistakes, Carl, again, I'm sure you see this and you have to redirect people in this, and it's, you have to set your goals first. I have entered so many, throughout my career, I've entered strategic planning meetings where I'm asked, can you join the strategic planning meeting, or can you review my strategic plan? And I'll see the how, and I'll see the tasks, which are the when and the who, but I have no reference point of what those correlate to when it comes to the goals they want to reach and how those goals are going to be measured. So if we look at this in a very simple hierarchy, if we start at the top and we look at strategy, Strategy truly, if we look at the principle of this, it's truly a balance between the objective of what you want to accomplish and the action that's going to take place to achieve that. That's the simplest view of strategy. If we go to another level and we look at what leadership or management should be doing, they should be helping define the what and the why. So what are we doing, which is the goal, and why are we doing it? And just for, to be fully transparent, I only in recent times have added the why, because I know Simon Sinek with his book, on business, and he talks about the why being so important. I used to actually treat why as a subcategory of what, but I think it is important to look at both of those, because if you are a leader, you need to define not just what that group is going, that organization is going to be doing, but you want them to understand why you're doing it so they feel that they are part of it and it's part of their culture, it's part of the values, and they know where they're going to wind up and what they're going to achieve by doing those things. All right. Then the strategy has a home of how. So right now, whether it's in my own businesses or the boards I work with or the businesses I consult, when I hear the word strategy, I want to make sure that they're describing the word how. And in most cases, that's not the case. They're describing the what and the why, or the when and the who. And that to me is not a fit, because the strategy can be tweaked. You can keep the same goals and change your strategy and accomplish the same thing with your goals. It may be that your business has become more profitable. Many of the things of the how or your strategy that are being accomplished manually, you can now do in a more automated way by investing some budget into a software. Well, the strategy changed, but it's still in support of your goal, and it may actually decrease your timeline, which would again change your tasks. So typically, if we look at this now from a governance viewpoint, if I'm from my boards or the boards I work with, I'm actually laser focused on what their goals are first and foremost. And I want to know that not just the overall board, but every board member is, from a governance viewpoint, they understand what the goals have been set, or what goals have been set, and have they ensured that the goals' relevance. And that's both individual goals and grouped goals for that period of time. Governance for strategy is truly validating the approach. Is this the best way to go about this? This is where the experience in my world of board directorship comes into play, is to say, when I view the strategy, I want to first evaluate, is it in support fully of the goal or the goals that we're looking at, the integrated goals? And can I offer up any other insights on how to get this done in a more efficient or more effective way? And of course, the tasks, I'm looking at that from a governance viewpoint, not of the specific task, but of how do I measure this? Are there groupings of tasks I can put together and look at this from a milestone viewpoint to make sure that these goals are going to be reached in the timeframes and the milestones that we've set for this? Now, just to pivot quickly on this and look at this, is to say that you can't pivot unless you have your goals and your strategy set to begin with, because the pivot is on typically the tasks and a portion of your strategy. So for today's topic of pivoting your strategy, first and foremost, let's look at this very simply. You want to set your goals that you want to accomplish. Then you want to look at how you're going to accomplish those things. And then you want to look at the tasks that you're going to do, or the focus areas that you're going to spend your time to get those things done. When that is set, pivoting this becomes extremely easy. The leaders right now that you see are panicking for many reasons, right? For the crisis we're in with coronavirus or other things that were leading up to this. They're panicking because they're having trouble pivoting from something that maybe wasn't working or wasn't correct to begin with. I can tell you right now that businesses I work with that had in-depth strategies and goals around disaster recovery and business continuation planning, they are working quite calmly right now on what they have to do, because they're changing small aspects of their strategy and they're changing larger portions of their tasks, but they're all in support of many of the same goals. They may have just changed their timeline of those goals. So the takeaway from this is understand whether it's a corporate strategy or a personal strategy, it's truly about looking at what strategy means, where it sits in this very simple 3-step diagram, and understanding it's the how that is in support of the what and the why, which are your goals. Start to think about this in this way personally, because it allows you to ground your strategy and ground your goals. And it allows you to really take a different take, and it will be calming to you in the long term. So Carl, I could talk for days about this, just in taking a strategy or a view of strategy and making it as simplistic as possible, and to allow for a recurring view that comes to your mind every time you hear strategy. And this is both for personal and in the corporate realm.
Yeah, Mark, I like when I remember seeing the slide for the first time and we started talking, I thought this was great. And I sometimes keep it even simpler of just how do you get from A to B? And that's strategy. And it's by definition not strategy when you're not moving to a new position. And that at the end of the day, because that just is just maintenance. And so I love this view. I love this way of looking at things. And I think once again, whether it's your personal or your corporate strategy, it could definitely be applied. There is a question here. Bingo, yeah. So Mark used the word pivot. That's my number one word right now. And yeah, everything is about pivoting, right? Because so many different industries have changed from one direction to another. So that's an absolute good insight, Brent.
If I could just add one quick thing to this, Carl, I usually hate to use industry buzzwords because again, they get so overused and overplayed that they again start to mean different things to different people. When I hear the word pivot, the first thing that pops into my mind, whether it's for my personal goals and strategy or for the businesses or my companies, I think of the following. What are we pivoting? The goals, the strategy, or the tasks, or combinations of those together, right? So the word pivot now has more meaning to it, and you understand where to classify the discussion you're about to have. So to me, if the immediate discussion of the starting point is a pivot on strategy and tasks, there's been an issue in the planning because you first have to talk about the goals to even understand if you need to pivot on your strategy or your tasks. So give that word pivot some meaning by applying it to one of these three stages or phases of what we view of strategic aspect of whether it's planning or even just the discussions and the honing of your plan.
Hey, Mark, there was a secondary question that came up. It said, you made a comment about, and this had to do with pivoting going again, says companies faring well today have defined goals and have emergency contingency plans in place. All they need to do is to pivot and make smaller strategy changes and larger task changes. Can you give us an example of some of your clients that actually have had to just make some small pivots?
Sure. Well, some of them were in the midst of say a work at home program where they knew that that's the way the markets were going. They knew that today's workforce is demanding that they're able to work from home, whether it's full-time or even part-time. So some of those companies that were already in the throes of starting with that process of setting their goals, even if it was a few years down the path, they simply pivoted their strategy to support a faster rollout of that plan. So they diverted some of their funding for laptops for some of their workforce that would not have originally been able to leave the office because of their working environment. The goals, of course, changed because they pivoted from a time frame around a larger ability for a work-at-home workforce. They pivoted that to a shorter time frame, basically. So it no longer was just about the early stage of the investigative and the discovery work of that. They actually moved that project. They pivoted the time frame of that project to complete in a matter of weeks versus a matter of months to get that done to allow their workforce now to be in that space. It's probably not the best example, but it's the one that immediately comes to mind. And all of these, by the way, were under also the umbrella of risk, business continuation, and the potential of fitting under the risk area for disaster recovery. So this particularly was under the umbrella of what a board was collaborating with the CEO of this particular organization. But looking in from the outside on that, it was looking at this from what are we actually pivoting? We pivoted not a goal, but we pivoted the timeline of a goal, which then changed the strategy, which allowed for us to say we can't do this all in-house in the timeline we're looking at. We need to pivot now and bring people in from the outside to help us implement this in a faster manner.
Good stuff, Mark. Yeah, let's go ahead and pop through and talk through now the details of how you can actually start getting this done.
Sure. So one of the big things, and I see this with a lot of lectures or webinars, and they're kind of my pet peeve, is that everybody can, you and I, Carl, we could talk about theory and strategy all day long, but it's not until you kind of see this applied where somebody can use it, where I think a webinar truly gains its stars and it makes the time spent worthwhile. So let me just frame this out for a moment. I'm a big process guy. I don't like to think that my process gets in the way of innovative thought. But I do think that, especially working with teams or boards or any level of an organization, project teams for that matter as well, the group has to understand where they're going and what the path is going to be. This is also the same for an individual. So you're working on your own individual plan. So I wanted to take a focus here and say, okay, how do we look at the thought process or the path for us to walk down, and what does that look like for us? So let me jump into this for a moment. So my mind is very focused in these buckets or boxes, the way you see it here right now. And you may tweak this to a way that you think of it as well, but I think it's starting with this initial path. So I would say to myself, in a topic area, when I think of a topic area, I think of it as an area of interest or need. So we could think about that for both a large business, a small business, or even for you personally. So an area of need may be some of the following areas: to further education, to further your presence, and we're going to define that a little bit further in a moment. Personal marketing, I like to think of the inbound content marketing space here, but before we solution, it's just the marketing component where, Carl, I think you said one of the reasons somebody joined today was to get their name out there. I forget exactly what it was, but was to market themselves better. There's a perfect example of that, and I'll use that one first as we go through this. Personal development, and maybe even throw in, from a personal viewpoint, a hobby that you want to be able to spend more time on, that brings you joy or brings you closer together with friends that also enjoy that. So I like to think first at its highest level, what is a topic area or an area of interest or need that I want to focus my efforts into? And then I think of, if I do get involved in this, I'm going to move now to this goal column. What would I view as successful as my involvement in that topic area? And it's a very different way to think of this, because many people will just get involved with something and they'll say, oh, I'll see where it takes me, or we'll see how this goes. And I can tell you, when I hear that, I think to myself that that is going to be likely a person that is not satisfied when they see when they get to the end of this path. They're not able to guide themselves even towards a certain goal. So everything is reactive. It's happening to them. It's not happening for them. So when we think about setting goals, let's look at the marketing one for the attendee to this webinar that mentioned something about this. So if you're looking to apply marketing to yourself personally, I like to think about this as a goal of actively pursuing channels to get my name recognizable within targeted industry verticals. Now, this is a personal goal that has corporate or professional ties to it, but it's not necessarily only for the company I'm working for at that time. That's why I view it as personal. Now, the next thing that's actually missing from that is how you would set something that's measurable against that. But before we get to that, let me first go. So we talked about the topic area, which is your area of interest or your need. It's your goal of what you would view as successful in getting involved in that space. And in a moment, we'll talk about how do you make that measurable. And then it's, before we get into the task, this is the biggest mistake. People jump into, well, what am I going to do to support my topic area and reach my goal? That's a mistake, and this is where most strategies fail. You first want to talk about or think about, what areas do I need to focus or channel my efforts that are going to bring me success in reaching my goal, and then the tasks come after that. So a quick thing in the marketing space here. It may be, I need to focus my efforts and channels of effort into getting esteemed placement organizations in my field. So if I'm looking for a way to get my name out there in my specific industry that's outside the umbrella of my own or the company I work for, I want to start to reach out to organizations that are esteemed in my field. I didn't say how as of yet. I'm just saying that's a focus area, right? And before you start solutioning, which is tasks, let's move to the next area. It's another focus area or channel of effort that you would put your time and your thoughts into. And that's maybe packaging and representation of your abilities and your experience. This is another area that many people, they have skill set, they have experience, they have proof in terms of certifications, but they haven't taken all that and really packaged that in a way that allows other people to truly understand what they're about and what their capabilities are. So the focus area, before I solution how I'm going to do that, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to focus efforts in the packaging and representing my abilities and my experience. The other area, to get my marketing out there of my topic and to reach my goal to become known in my targeted industry vertical, is I want to somehow reach decision makers in my field. Again, I'm not saying how, I'm not saying emails, calls. I'm just thinking to myself at the highest level, I want to try to focus efforts in some way on reaching decision makers in my field. And you'll notice how in many of these, I've avoided the descriptive word before this. So yes, I put packaging and representation as one of the focus areas, but if we look at decision makers in my field, I purposely avoid using descriptive words here because that can actually force me down a path of the task and not the area or the focus of thought or the channel of effort. So what we're doing is we're building this thought process from the top down. Most people that even claim to be strategic, they're actually building from the bottom up. Well, we have this expertise, we can get these tasks done, we have this budget to work with. I think that's an absolute mistake. You want to first start at the other end of where do I focus my efforts in terms of what topic area, what goals am I going to set, and then what are some of the channels of effort I'm going to look into. Then the overlay of budget, scope, and time fits over that. The other way to do that backwards, it's too limiting, and you'll see that companies that have lost their keys to innovation, they in many cases are looking at this from the other side, looking task first, goal later. You want to make sure you're looking at this from the other way around, 180 degrees out from that. It's hard to do. I still have to remind myself that I'm not in solutioning mode to do this. I'm a fixer. I want to get in there. Carl, you're probably like this as well, right? It's here's what I want to accomplish, and this is what I'm going to do to get there. It is a mistake because it pulls all of the innovative thought and this, if we go back to the definition of strategy, this integrated pattern of decision making is lost. And you've totally lost the whole definition and the whole approach of strategy just by that alone. And this is why so many people are terrible at strategy. They're not policing their thought processes to get to this viewpoint you're seeing right now. So again, another topic, Carl, I'm sorry I could speak for days on this, but the takeaway from this is to get this structured thinking of moving to the topic area first, your area of interest or need, thinking about how you would judge yourself in your own personal realm if it was going to be successful, and then where you would put your channels of effort to support that. And then the next step of this would be what tasks would you do to get those done. And of course, Carl, going back to your previous slide, how do you make this all measurable? Define each one of these. In each focus area, what are you going to define to be successful? And especially in your goal area, define what it is that makes that successful.
Yeah, Mark, I've got a comment and good comment. Thanks for the comment there. A great roadmap that one of the Ulrika had sent out. One of the things from my perspective as a comment is I love that packaging and representation of abilities experience. You know, personally, I had 7 trips immediately canceled when the travel bans basically had come in play. I was pretty much the majority of my clients are not here based in Portland. I fly around, I go see them. I of course can do digital strategic facilitation, but I had done a lot of on-site. And this has created a great opportunity. Mark and you and I wouldn't have had the time to do this if it wasn't for this opportunity. And so one of the silver linings in this great world global pause is if you're in marketing for yourself or for your business, it's a great time to package up some things you have and to share with it. Now, Mark, I'm going to put the other side of the coin here, which is I'm a huge fan of setting big, hairy, audacious goals. But I also see the number one reason why people fail is because they have too many goals.
Absolutely.
They get overwhelmed. What do you do? What's the right amount of goals to help make sure that people are going to have more success?
So it's a great question. And I'll say that this is an issue both for companies as well as individuals. And this feeling of being overwhelmed is something you have to and you need to avoid, because that just manifests itself into stress, which manifests itself into all sorts of other negative words that I'm sure we could spend some time throwing out there. So the key to this is to make this as manageable as possible, but also I'll say manageable / relevant as possible. Now, the long story short on this is that know that we are humanly programmed to think in threes. So I will tell you, if I'm working with an organization that is in paralysis, I'll use that word again. If we go back and think about the history of companies getting stuck in this strategic paralysis, if they are stuck in this paralysis, We will work on getting them down to, sometimes they're far-reaching goals and topic areas, but we'll try to make sure that it is manageable and it is relevant. So my answer to you directly is keep it in threes. Do 3 topic areas, 3 goals, and then have 3 focus areas for each one of those topic areas. And you'll find that it has a calming effect to it because we are programmed to remember in threes. Quick example of this is that the famous statement of blood, sweat, and tears, we all use that. We've all used it before. Originally, when that came out, and I believe it was Churchill who said it, there was a 4th one. Nobody remembers what the 4th one was. Blood, sweat, tears, and what was the 4th one? We don't know. So that's a prime example of how we work in threes and how we remember things in threes. And if you remember things, it is actually has a calming effect to it.
That's awesome, Mark. Thanks for your insights on that. And I think it's so huge if doing those things. There's actually a book called the 4 Disciplines of Execution, and one of the key things they talk about is that thing of 3 is once somebody does more than 3 focused strategic goals that they're working on, it tends to fail either in terms of quality and time, or it's just not getting done at all. So awesome insights. I think we could go ahead and pop to the next slide here as we get just like 7 minutes left. And this, I love this. This was an interesting quote. So this is actually referring to New Year's resolutions. And Marshall Schwantes wrote this particular article. This was a Scranton University, I believe it was. This is crazy. Only 8% of New Year's resolutions get done. Now, there's a massive list of why things fail and don't fail, but there's usually a few key elements behind it. But the one common thing is that 8% of people, they didn't do it alone. By the way, there's a reason why you're all on this call today. You're not low achievers. You are people who are interested or learning. They're trying to get things done. I have a coach. I have somebody who helps me get things done. I share and look at best practices with people time. I call for people to continue to get these different concepts around it. And so I just want you to keep that in mind that, a part of this, hopefully this has been helpful for you, this presentation that we've had, and to realize that, as we're trying to strive and to achieve awesome goals that are there, generally people didn't do it alone. They had some type of accountability partner, somebody to help give them confidence, to help make sure they can actually get to that next step. So Mark, let's go ahead and talk about kind of wrap up here. And then we'll also allow for anybody who willing to extra to have additional Q&A.
All right, so just one quick thing to say when you talk about New Year's resolutions, Carl. A quick thought on that is that if you look at most people's New Year's resolutions, they're actually listing tasks, right? So it's in total support of what we're talking about. Is that if they listed it as an area of interest or need, and then move to a goal and how they're going to measure that, and then they said, the focus areas to support that, their New Year's resolution would not be, I'm going to go to the gym more often. It would have a whole precursor to that of the why, the what, and the how, and then the reason and the task of how they would get that done. So just a quick little thing that I think of when I hear New Year's resolutions. Probably a co-authored article between the two of us, Carl, coming up. We should think about that. So just to summarize for today, remember that to me, it is imperative that you have your own personal goals and your own personal strategy. This is where, if we talk about New Year's resolutions or those things, start thinking about this differently, that you have to create a path for your life and a path for the things that you want to accomplish in your life. And the easiest way to do that is to have your own personal strategy. You will find it's going to bring you this comfort. It's going to bring you calmness. It's going to, other people will mention that person knows what that person, what they're about and where they're going. It's almost impossible to hide it when you've created your own personal goals and your own personal strategy. Number 2, goals first, strategy next, tasks last. The ordering of this matters. And then you want to measure those things, Carl, to what you showed in your 4 stages, right? And then to the point of how many, start with 3 focus areas. Actually, I should have said topic areas there. I just noticed I have a typo in there. Sorry. I'll take the full responsibility for that. Start with 3 topic areas first, and allow that to expand if you can as time goes on, but do not overwhelm yourself with a personal strategy. You should feel excited about it, not feel like it's a burden of more things to do or more tasks for you to get done within your own personal space. So saying all that, if you need help with these areas, both Carl and I are available to you. With my business, there's a consulting aspect of a strategy workshop for both individuals as well as groups or corporations or companies. The speaking that was mentioned earlier, there's a whole speaking tour that I do, an international speaking tour on the strategy of strategy, which touches on some of the things we just mentioned today. And of course, in my board space, there's a board evaluation, which I can tell you in 10 seconds or less that the strategic failures of boards accounts for 90+% of why boards to this day are not working correctly. They are failing not in governance, they're failing in strategy. And it's why I focused a good portion of my time and my efforts in that space, looking at my own personal plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And in terms of the things that I can help do with the organization, especially this time, and thinking of your individual strategy or perhaps helping out with your corporate strategy, is one of the parts I work on is your key performance indicators or KPI. And I have a program that not only we can do on an individual basis, but we can do in a more cost-effective, like a mastermind program of working with other people. The most important thing is the leading indicators, how you're measuring getting to progress to the lagging. And it's a huge insight for everybody that I work with that. And then helping coaching people to navigate their personal strategy with purpose. And then an advisory role on the company level, how to navigate the organizational strategy. Those are the key things that I work with organizations, not just once again for ideation, but helping to give them steps to how to complete them. You can contact, once again, Mark through his you can see it through the website. You have my website there at 40strategy.com. There is a sign up on there. There's a list that you can do and just put in your email address. So of course, we have your email information. We'll be happy to follow up with you. And we just love to share. I have a little link, and you can sign up for a 20-minute chat to talk with me, no cost, just to get your insights and to give you something to think about. So we do have some additional comments. So we're right near the end, and we're going to leave it open. Mark, are you okay? Do you have a little time afterwards to just stay open for Q&A? Okay. Yeah, so we're going to stay for a Q&A perspective, and we will keep it recorded. If you're in that situation where you have to hop off, first of all, we just really want to thank you for your time. We know it's valuable, and we appreciate you sharing and being a part of this piece. And so with that, you're welcome to leave. We are going to continue. There are some questions that people had and some comments. I did like this cute comment was thoughtful. Joseph had here is The Trinity of Structured Thinking. That's perhaps the next book you have, Mark. A great little title. So yes, hey Brent, I love that you said this hour went fast. I agree. It was really fast from my perspective. The question here from Don is, hi Mark, please once more your last comment that business failures are the result of strategy, not governments. That is an amazing insight. Sure. You want to talk about that in a little bit more detail?
Absolutely. And I'll mention two things for more reference on this. I've had a couple articles out there about this. I write about that extensively in my book that's behind me as well. And mainly how it's called Across the Board. It's really meant for board leadership, but I think it has parallels to any level of leadership in an organization. It's as simple as this to answer that question. You can't govern something where you don't understand what the strategy is, because if you don't understand the strategy, you also may not understand what the goals are. So to me, a board that is not, or a management team or a leadership group that is not involved with the strategy or having a deep understanding of the strategy, tell me what they're governing. They're not able to govern. They're supposed to be governing the how things are getting done, right? The what and the who and the when are for management, right? Or for certain levels of the organization to handle and to deliver. But in a leadership position, when you talk about governance, tell me what you're governing if you don't know what the strategy is. You're governing the how it's getting done and the progress against the how, and you're governing the fact of the comparison of, is it fully in support of the goals? So to me, strategy sits above governance. You cannot govern properly without understanding what the strategy is and what the goals are. And I don't mean to oversimplify that, but that's truly what it is. I think there's a whole lost art of governance, because somehow this aspect of being versed in strategy has been lost. You see people that claim to be experts in governance and they have no strategy background. I have no idea how that's possible.
Yeah, it's, you know, Mark, one of the things you didn't want me to share in terms of a quote, because it could have a sensitivity part to it. Of course, I can't help myself from not bringing it up. It's interesting, these things of 8% success in New Year's resolutions, 90% of organizations fail. And, and there's also a reason why 10% of the people who are really leading and have a significant impact, right, on people's lives. And it's why, though, is because they're getting things done. And that's the part that I'm always trying to encourage people with, is have that vision clear. Where do you want to go? Set clear goals, start and get it done, and then measure to make sure you're making progress, right? And those are the things that are the difference between the people who are leaders, who are running businesses, that are running government, and then contributing and making a difference out there in the world. And I really encourage, you know, once again, for all of you to continue that path. We're going to still be here. I don't see any additional questions, but just in case, is there any other additional questions that people want to add on? Or Mark, do you have any other insights that you have that you want to share as we get ready to sign off?
Well, maybe, you know, just the last question is one of the questions I typically get, and not to sound salesy in this, but it's what should someone look for when searching or vetting for the right strategy expert to work with? And I would tell you that they typically have some of the same traits. They will understand not just the history or the background of strategy, but also understand how it applies in, again, not just the corporate or professional world, but a strategy should also have the components of what we're talking about today, which is personal strategy. How are you aligning what the company or organization is getting done with what people personally want to accomplish for themselves in that organization simultaneously? And it's another area when we talk about values and culture, those are the organizations that have combined all of these areas together. That's the type of person you want to work with. You know, and again, Carl, without sounding like we're self-serving, but I know that both of us have that belief. It's the whole reason that I think we gravitate towards doing our educational things together, is that understanding that all of these things are interlinked. So again, just to support, if you're looking for help in those areas, whether it be in the professional realm or in your personal realm, both Carl and I stand ready to support you in those spaces with our packaged offerings.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mark. And Mark, this has been a pleasure spending time. Thank you for everyone who still has hung around as participants. You've been awesome. Great participation today. And with that, once again, we just want to thank you for this. We're going to plan to send this out, this recorded message, to everybody. And thank you so much for participating with us. And once again, feel welcome to connect with us. And we're here to help. With that, so this once again is Carl Cox. And speaking for Mark, we hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.